you know. Yes, so that mark is, so that incident report was supposedly my son tripped over his boot while chasing a duck. That was my son. At the time, he's 3 years old, broken arm, from supposedly slipping while getting out of the shower. He's 3 years old. Why was he left alone?
Welcome back to another episode of Deliver Us, the fight for our children. Today's story is one of heartbreak, betrayal, and spiritual warfare. I want you to take a moment and imagine your father is fighting stage 3 esophageal cancer. You're raising 4 children, doing everything you can to hold it together, and then the state shows up and rips your children away because your house is too cluttered while you're packing to move. Now imagine months later, after losing so much, you give birth to your newborn child, and another county CPS walks into the hospital without its warrant and takes your baby. That's what happened to Samantha Barnard. Her story is the definition of corruption, 2 counties, multiple lies, fake drug tests, planted evidence, abuse, hidden under red tape, and babies stolen in plain sight. Today, Samantha is speaking up, not just for herself, but for every mother who has ever been silenced by the system. You're about to hear the truth, the raw, unfiltered truth of what CPS doesn't want you to know. And we're not backing down. This is Deliver Us, the fight for our children. And this is Samantha's story. Hello, Samantha. Welcome to the podcast. I really appreciate you for coming on and telling your testimony, getting your story out there. At any moment, you can just start.
Okay, so my name is Samantha. My case initially starts with, one county, but it ends up including 2 different counties. My case started back in January 14th of 2022. Going back a little prior to that, just a little backstory. My dad was diagnosed with stage 3 esophageal cancer the day after Thanksgiving of 2021. The house that I lived in, my parents lived in the front house. I lived in the back house. And our landlord lived in the property next door, and she owned both properties, all 3 houses. Our landlord initially passed away, and her children sold the house without any prior warning. So we woke up to a real estate agent knocking on our door, pretty much telling us to get our crap and get out. At the time, my mom was working, my husband worked full time. And so I was home taking care of, at the time, my 4 children, also taking care of my dad because he had a G-tube. And for those that don't know what a G-tube is, it's a tube that they surgically inserted into his stomach to be able to be fed and given his medication because he could not swallow. And also while doing that, I was packing both my parents' house and my house, because we all had to move. So we were supposed to be out of there January 15th. January 14th, we get a knock on the door from, as you know, CPS. And they eventually take my kids to unsanitary housing because the house was dirty. Which at that time, with everything going on, cleaning that house was the least of my worries. As I said, I had 4 kids at the time. They were 8, 4, 2, and 1. And my 2-year-old, he was actually delayed. So it was like having 2 1-year-olds, along with my dad's medications, feedings, and packing both houses. So CPS comes, they remove my kids.
Samantha, was the house that
Yes.
I'm sorry. Was the house that dirty? Was it? I mean, was it?
Well, it wasn't
I
that
mean,
dirty. It's
can't
just
they just like?
anything that we weren't taking, we just threw in a corner. And I hadn't vacuumed the floor or anything up yet. So,
Right.
Stuff gets pushed under beds and under couches and under dressers. And, when you have poor little kids running around, they do mess with the stuff that was under everything and it gets scattered everywhere.
Yeah.
And like I said, I just hadn't had a chance to vacuum it up or anything, which I wasn't worried about it anyways, considering we weren't getting a deposit back. And by the end of the day, I was just exhausted.
Yeah. That shouldn't be a reason to take your kids anyway. I think that, I mean, the best, I mean, I think the way they should go about something like that is like, just monitoring it and sending somebody over there to make sure at least it's clean. I mean, not taking your kids for something like that. That's crazy.
Exactly. And, I even told them, we're not even going to be in this house in the morning. Why take my kids? My mom, she does work for IHSS. I do too, which is through the state of California, taking care of the elderly and the disabled. So we both have to go through, I had to go through a DOJ background check and a FBI background check, in order to work for in-home support services. So I actually called my mom and all I could say is, Mom, they're taking my babies. And I don't know how, but somehow my mom managed to get clear across town before they even left with my kids. They refused to give my kids to my mom. I also informed them that my uncle was already certified as an approved foster family. They refused to give my kids to my uncle. So when they did the initial removal, they only got my 3 youngest because my oldest we had already got my dad up to my grandma's because he was rapidly, from the time my dad was diagnosed till the time my dad passed away was a little over 2 months. My daddy passed away February 15th of 2022, a month after my kids were taken. So we had already moved him up to my grandma's because he was doing too bad. My oldest at the time was in private cheerleading. She had been in private cheerleading since she was 2 years old. And so my mom takes her to cheer practice and everything. And she had practice. So my oldest was with my dad and my grandma already. And so after they removed my youngest 3, I told my mom to keep my oldest because I knew she couldn't come be with me. And, the caretaker that had my kids initially, you can tell when a foster parent is doing it for the money and when they're actually doing it for the children. That caretaker, I actually still talk to her to this day, even though she has none of my children. Anytime she even put my children on a timeout, she would call me and let me know that my kids were placed on a timeout and what for. And I believe that's ultimately why CPS moved my kids from her, because she requested to keep my kids until we reunified. And they told her, no, you guys are best friends, which, the foster parents are supposed to support reunification. But as a lot of us knows, with this corruption, that's not in their playbook. So CPS actually ended up setting up a sibling visit for my oldest to visit with my younger children because my younger children kept asking about their sister. All my kids are very, very, very close. So my mom went to take my daughter to visit her siblings. She actually had cheer practice again after the visit. She had taken brownies that she had baked. And At first my daughter didn't want to go because the visit was supposed to be at, they call it the CBC, the Children's Visitation Center, in the county that I was in. But for some reason, the caretaker just invited my daughter to come to her house for the visit, because she was in the middle of doing something, or I don't remember. She told me what it was, but I can't remember right this moment. And so at first, my oldest child did not want to go to the visit because she was scared that they were going to take her. I had spoke to the supervisor at the time, and, she informed my mom, she informed me, she informed my daughter, that they were not going to take her into protective custody. They could see that she was happy, that she was healthy, that she was being, her needs were being met. That she was just going to go visit her siblings, and then she would be returned back to nanny, which is what my kids call my mom, and go to cheer practice. And my mom told me, Leanna, Lollipop, is worried about going. And I told her, well, if she doesn't want to go, do not make her. I never force my kids to do anything they don't want unless it's something that they need. So eventually my daughter agreed to go to the caretaker's house to visit with her siblings. After the visit, instead of returning her to my mom like they did, they ended up taking my daughter into protective custody. Which I immediately, called the caretaker that had my other three, informed her of the situation, and asked her if she possibly had placement and if she could possibly take placement of my oldest daughter, so my kids weren't separated. Which they wouldn't give my oldest daughter to her either. So that's initially how they started splitting up my kids. Once they got my oldest placed with another caretaker, they moved my other daughter to the caretaker with my oldest. So they had my girls together and my boys together. So while the girls were with this new caretaker, the caretaker had taken my youngest daughter at the time for a well child visit. And that's the pictures that I sent you with the 4 bruises. She had the one on her arm, her thigh, her leg, and her back, I believe it was. It's the 4 that's all together. And there was documentation from the pediatrician. Nope, not that one.
Not that one?
No. Yes. So those are the 4 bruises on her. There was documentation with that stating low suspicion of abuse at this time. The caretaker tried saying that it was from my children playing rough, which at that time my daughter was 4 years old, the one that has the bruises, and my oldest daughter was 8. And my 4-year-old would make my 8-year-old cry. So, and knowing my kids, my 8-year-old would not have left those bruises on her sister. Not only that, school had just started. So my oldest was at school all day. How was she leaving bruises on her little sister? So after that, I had to fight tooth and nail to get my daughter removed from that home, which they eventually moved her from there, but they left my oldest daughter there. Then with my boys, they stayed together for a while, and eventually they ended up splitting up my girls and splitting up my boys. So all my kids were separated. My oldest son, he is, at the time he was nonverbal. He's starting to talk now. Because when I had him, he was actually born deceased and they had to revive him. They had to do CPR. They shocked him twice, incubated him, and within 3 hours, he was airlifted to Madera's Children's Hospital for 3.5 weeks. So at this time, he didn't really talk. He could say he knew mom and dad, but that's pretty much all he could say. And with him, he started, after my daughter started getting the bruises, then he started getting bruises from the caretaker he was with once they split my boys up. That's the one that with the couple marks on his neck. Also the picture I didn't send because I didn't have time is I have one where he has a bruise on his throat, where the caretaker stated that it was from them pulling him back by the hood of his sweatshirt and the zipper left the marks. Which I also have medical training. I am a medical assistant and I did work pediatrics. So I know if it was from a sweatshirt, the mark would be down here closer to the collarbone. It would not be up underneath his neck, and it would not look like a handprint. So I've actually called the child abuse hotline on 3 or 4 of the caretakers due to bruises on my kids. With my son that I'm speaking about, I told the caseworker, I said, I want my son moved and I want him moved now. The caseworker told me that they couldn't just move him without a warrant. And I told him, how do you figure? You guys removed them from me without a warrant. And that was for no physical markings on my children. And, I told him, I said, if I have to go stand outside this caretaker's house on the street, because that is public property, to make sure my son's not being hurt, then that's what I will do. I never threatened nothing. And he had the audacity to tell me that the bruise is going away, so my son is safe, and that wouldn't be a smart decision for me because I would end up in jail. Which when it comes to my kids, I don't care. So, I've actually done, some research, and most of the reasons why children are removed are not for physical abuse. Neglect is the top reason, and that's frequently property related and not physical, 64%. Parental drug abuse, which often includes marijuana and prescription drugs, prescribed by their doctor, at 35%. Domestic violence exposure, just because you argue with your spouse in front of your kids and they hear it or they see it. And, even if the kids aren't harmed during that altercation with your spouse, is 30 to 60%. Unsafe housing conditions, often due to homelessness or poverty, is about 9%. And confirmed physical harm cases, 13%. Over 84% of removals are not related to direct physical harm. And that should raise some serious concerns, and bring up discretion and biases. Like, obviously, that shows that they are removing more children from safe houses than they need to be. Also, children go missing, get killed, or even killed more while they're in state care. During one single audit, there was over 34,800 children that went missing from foster care. And many of those were never reported to the national databases. 40% of those that go missing 4 or 5 times on average because they want to get away from the foster parents and go back to their parents. Foster youth are at a higher risk of sex trafficking and chronic instability. And children in foster care are 42% more likely to die than their peers, and mortality rates for ages 1 through 4 double the general population than if the kid was remained at home. And the deaths often stem from physical abuse or neglect or medical failure in the foster and adopted placement. They place our children in these homes with these approved safe caregivers. When these caregivers are hurting our, but then that's okay. They're not doing nothing wrong. Also, foster youth experience PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, at higher rates than a war veteran, and many face long traumas. Housing issues, homelessness, poor educational outcomes, and also, trust and emotional attachment issues. The trauma is from unnecessary separation, and it often outweighs the risk that CPS claims that they mitigate, Um, and I can see these numbers, and I believe these numbers, because when it comes to emotional, my middle daughter, she's now 7 years old, but when she was 4, we were on a comfort call, and she asked me, "Mommy, why haven't you and Daddy came and got us? Do you not love us or want us anymore?" And for any parent to hear their 4-year-old ask them if they love them because they don't understand. I hear my daughter ask me that every day in the back of my head. That's something that haunts me, for her to think that, and kids don't just think that unless they hear something. And I told her, I said, "Look, Mommy and Daddy love you and your brothers and sisters more than anything. And if we could come get you right now and bring you home, we would. But we can't, or else we're going to get in trouble by the cops." You can't really explain that to a 4-year-old.
Right.
But, so moving on, so we finally, me and my husband, we did everything that they requested, without it being court ordered. I did parenting, substance abuse, mental health. My husband in the beginning did parenting and anger management. I have, let me put my camera down real quick. Okay. I have, certificates here for parenting, everything that we completed. My husband's folder. My folder. I also did a behavioral ABA certificate for behavioral issues for my oldest son. And we finally got a house. Our house was approved for our kids to come home. We got, a whole weekend with our kids being home. Which I was explaining to my children, that we have to take steps. First we start off with these people watching us, visit with them. And then, they get to come with us for a little bit during the day, but then they have to go home. And then, you guys get to come home, and stay the night, but have to go back. And then after that, the next step is you guys get to come home and stay home. And so they were excited. We were at the point where they got to come home and stay the night. From what I've been telling them, their next step was they're going to get to come home. So I dropped my kids off Sunday evening as I was supposed to. When I picked them up on Friday, the caretaker that had my boys asked me if I had talked to the caseworker. And I told her no, why? And she said, well, from what the caseworker had told her, that if everything goes well over the weekend, they're going to go talk to my oldest on Monday. And if everything went well, then my kids would be coming home on Wednesday. Hearing that made me so happy. So I took my kids home Sunday, and, in my head, I didn't mention nothing to my kids, but in my head, I'm like, okay, a couple more days and my kids will be home. At this time, I'm 8 months pregnant with my youngest child. Monday morning comes and I receive a call from our caseworker, and she tells me that she needs to come out and do another home check. And I said, okay, figured she just wanted to come out to make sure the house was still cleaned up, see how the weekend went. No problem, so me and my husband, we get up, get out of bed, he gets a cup of coffee, we use the restroom, brush our teeth, the whole morning routine. When the caseworker gets there, she informs me that she's not there to do a home check, that she is actually there to drug test us. And this is the first time in over 2 years that they had ever came to our home to drug test us. Any other time, they would send us to the lab. And so to us, that was kind of a red flag. And also what they came with is like the little clear cups that you get in a motel. And one of the long tubes that you squeeze on the side and the top pops open. Nothing in plastic, which was another red flag for us. And I told her, I said, I wish you would told us that you were coming to drug test us, because we just used the restroom. And she's like, well, do you guys think that you could use the restroom again in 5 minutes? And my husband's like, no, there's no way I'm going to be able to. And I told her, well, for me, it's possible. I do have a child sitting on my bladder, but I can't guarantee that. So because we couldn't go to the restroom within those 5 minutes, they gave us a refusal to test. They took away our unsupervised visits, and our children did not get to come home. She then tells me that she'll have somebody come back out the next day to drug test my husband, and that she would be back in 2 days to drug test me. Okay, you just told me you could not give me a 10 to 15 minutes notice that you're coming to drug test us, because they have to be random, but you're going to give me a day and 2 days notice. There's 3 red flags there. 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out. So my husband, he goes to the smoke shop. He buys a Whizzinator and synthetic urine. Which a Whizzinator, for the ones that don't know, it looks like an actual penis, and it has a plastic bag that you put the synthetic urine in, and you squeeze the head, and it comes out of the head of the penis like they're peeing. And for me, I put it in a bottle and used it out of the Whizzinator for the next day. My test came back clean, and my husband's test came back dirty for methamphetamines. So we knew that they messed with the test, because there's no way synthetic urine is going to come back positive.
Right.
It's made in a lab. It's made to pass drug tests. So then the reason our kids couldn't come home wasn't a housing issue. It was now a substance abuse issue. So the following month, all of this happened in Kern County. My husband's from San Luis County, which is by the beach. It's about 2 hours away from Kern County. And his mom, she's older, mostly in bed. She could do a little bit here and there, but not much. And And so she needed some help. So, we drove out here so he can help her move some things. And within 3 hours of getting here, my water broke. And I ended up going to the hospital in Santa Barbara County. When I went to the hospital, my daughter, I had her C-section. She was, big, healthy baby, my biggest baby. She was 8 pounds, 13 ounces, 20 inches long, 5 days before her due date. 2 pediatricians looked over her, no signs of withdrawals. And, with having a C-section, the second they put the catheter in the mother, they have the drug test right then and there. They're going to have that drug test results before they have that baby out. And anybody who's had a kid, knows that if there is any substances in your system, they will not allow you to breastfeed that child. So I have her, everything's good. Like I said, 2 pediatrician comes, no signs of withdrawals, 8 pounds, 13 ounces. They allowed me to breastfeed her. She was born at 1:10 in the morning. And I breastfed her until about 8, 9 o'clock the next morning, when the nurse came in and told me that I cannot breastfeed my daughter due to having marijuana and methamphetamines in my system. But supposedly my daughter only tested positive for methamphetamines. So I tell them, that test is wrong. If I have two substances, as you say, in my system, then my child's going to have 2 substances in her system, not one or the other. And if it would be either one, it would be the one that stays in your system the longest. So it was weird to me because when the hospital contacted CPS, supposedly they contacted Kern County CPS instead of Santa Barbara County, which is unusual because most hospitals will contact CPS in their county, especially because they didn't know that I had an open CPS case in Kern County. But later on that day, I had a Kern County emergency response worker come and talk to me. Later on in the day, she called and told me that they would be taking my daughter into protective custody, and that they would be there on the 22nd to pick her up. During this whole time, I was unaware that Kern County was already finding placement for my daughter. They were already putting in the public health nurse referrals. And so, I talked to my caseworker the day that they were supposed to be there and get her. He called me. Kern County was supposed to be there at about 10, 11 o'clock that morning. But what they did is they had sent the foster parents to pick her up. Because in Kern County, as long as the foster parents have the paperwork, they can go to the hospital and pick up the babies. In Santa Barbara County, that's not their hospital policy. Santa Barbara County only releases to child welfare services in their county with a warrant, supposedly. So I talked to my caseworker about 2:30 that afternoon, and he told me that the caseworker that was coming to pick up my baby was about an hour away. And, by now I had learned my rights. I knew that there was only 3 legal ways that they could take my baby. That one was immediate physical bodily harm within the time it takes to get a warrant, resulting in, the child losing their life or a limb. And they can get a warrant 24/7 within 2 to 5 hours. If I gave them my consent, or if they had a warrant signed by a judge. So I tell my caseworker, I know my rights. We both know there's no immediate physical bodily harm to my child. I said, secondly, I do not give you my consent to take my child. I said, so unless you have a warrant signed by a doctor, you're not taking my kid. To that, he went dead silent. To the point I was like, hello, Frank, are you there? Which, that would tell anybody that they don't have a warrant. So, 2:30, so an hour away, that would put the CPS worker there about 3:30. We'll give her an extra hour because it was raining, so 4:30. 4:30 comes and goes, 5:30 comes and goes, 6:30 comes. And I finally tell my nurse, look, can you please go and get mine and my daughter's discharge papers? Like I told you all day, Kern County is not coming because they don't have a warrant. Now, it's getting late. We're at the beach. I have a newborn. So it's getting cold. I would like to get my child home. And so my nurse went to go and get mine and my daughter's discharge papers. When she walked back in with my discharge papers and Santa Barbara County CPS. And Santa Barbara County CPS took my child into custody under extenuant circumstances, which at the time I really, really, really wish I knew what that meant. Because all extenuant circumstances is immediate physical bodily harm to the child with no time to get a warrant. I also have, so let me back up for a second. During this whole time, I'm dealing with the hospital and everything, my husband actually ends up getting 86 from the hospital for no reason. They wouldn't let him come back up to my room when he had went to go get something to drink, and he came back up and they're like, no, you can't go up. The police department actually ended up getting called. And, my husband, he does have a lengthy criminal record. I didn't find this out until we went to the detention hearing, but CPS put in court documents that supposedly the police got called because my husband was threatening to blow up and shoot up the hospital. Which anybody knows, if that's a terrorist threat, even if you have a clean record, you're going to jail for that. Straight up. Well, needless to say, my husband never went to jail, but I did, contact the police department and got their journal entry for when they came. And, it says that the social worker from Kern County was en route to take custody of my daughter, and that the mother was refusing to get the child up, that Kern County was about 30 minutes away. And this was at 3:33 p.m. Okay. And so it says, what room, everything we're in. It says to have officer call the reporting party prior to entering the room, and states that my husband was on active parole, which he was already off of parole by this time, and that my husband was trying to prevent social workers from leaving, and he was yelling at employees. Well, that's a big difference from threatening to blow up and shoot up the hospital, I think. Which he wasn't yelling or threatening anybody. He had went to get something to drink. So the officer actually sits out in the lobby with my husband for about 45 minutes, and they're just chatting away. And, it states in the entry that CPS from Kern County did not have a signed warrant from a judge to seize the child from the mother. Child Welfare Services was contacted to respond and assist. However, Santa Barbara's ETA was 1 hour. So the officers cleared and advised the hospital staff to call back if Child Welfare Services obtains a warrant for the child. So neither county had a warrant for my child. What's even worse is, thankfully, I know it was God's doing, I got documentation that I shouldn't have. And according to this documentation, there is an 8-day gap where my child is not in the child welfare system. Kern County states that she is a dependent of Santa Barbara County. Santa Barbara County states that they never had custody of my daughter, which I know that she was never in a Santa Barbara County foster home, as Kern County claims, that she went directly to the Kern County foster home, because we had court on the 24th. We had a visit on the 25th. And, you know, they had moved my youngest daughter to another new home to be with her baby sister. So, you know, I requested, since that caretaker already had to bring my daughter to the visit, to have her bring my baby to the visit. So, you know, there's documentation that my child was at the visit and everything, but supposedly she's in a Santa Barbara County foster home. I have, you know, the records request from Santa Barbara County email stating that, you know, you do not have referrals in Santa Barbara County, therefore there are no records to produce. So if my child was in Santa Barbara County's custody, she would have records. So then after that, you know, I had contacted the emergency response worker from Santa Barbara County that removed my daughter. And, you know, I sent you the audio as well, but I also, transcribed
we can play
the
that
audio. Well, that one's pretty long.
Yeah, I can do it on a different.
Yeah,
I can do it on a
did
separate episode
transcribe
or
it,
something.
so you
It's
know,
not a big deal.
I could just read, you know, the main part, and then if you want, you can add it to something else just to verify what, you know, I'm reading is what was said. You know, and so
I might be able to post the audio in the comments.
Okay, yeah, you know, she tells me my name doesn't sound familiar. And, you know, I inform her that she actually came to the hospital and removed my daughter from my care on extenuate circumstances. This conversation was about a year after she removed my child, because that's when I received all the documentation from the appeal attorney and everything, and was going through everything. So this conversation was about a year later. And she goes, "Oh, okay, yeah, sorry, I do remember that. So for that, you would have to contact our AOP line and request your records." And I told her, you know, well, I had called the main office, and they said they didn't have any records for her, that I would need to speak with you. And she says, okay, well, she was the worker for the after hours, so it could have been that a different worker was assigned to the investigation at the time, that was never assigned to her directly. She was just the one that responded after hours. But any information that we did have that we interacted, would be in their system, which the email clearly states there's no records. There's nothing that we interacted. But yeah, I got her admitting to taking her.
Yeah.
I had also talked to a supervisor, which I don't think I sent you that recording. But I talked to the supervisor that he also, you know, stated that they never had my daughter in their custody, that they were just assisting Kern County with Kern County's warrant that Kern County didn't have, as verified by the police report. So then my next step was, you know, contacting the hospital to find out, which county did you guys release my child to? I know for a fact it was Santa Barbara County, but who signed her discharge papers? So when I called the hospital, I actually ended up speaking to a temp. And, you know, I informed her what I was trying to get. And, you know, I asked her, you know, do you guys keep record of, you know, the paper that you sign, that gets signed when, you know, stating that, you know, you gave them their discharge summary, and this is who's, you know, here's the parent who signed it, or here's the patient who signed it. You know, because as I said, you know, I do medical assisting. I also do medical billing and insurance coding. So I know for medical billing and insurance coding, there's certain records that you have to have, you know, and, she actually states that that paper is not in there. and that the only signature that's on there is not anybody's name, but it says home health. So then she tells me that I would need to speak to the records supervisor, which I sent you that audio as well. And, when she finds, I think from when I was talking to her and she was looking in, the documentation on the computer, I believe just from her reaction during our conversation that she's seen something where she was like, oh crap, we're in trouble. Because I already know from all of this, there is a lawsuit. They've done so many things wrong. And, I informed her of this, and, she was actually like, well, I actually can't say anything else, and I'm going to need to direct you to our risk management director. So I had spoke to the risk management director. I sent you that audio too. And, so like, this has been a very long process, but so after, so I'm actually in the process of filing an extraordinary writ to overturn my child's adoption. Because there's certain issues that have no statutory time limit to attack, and jurisdiction, fraud, violation of due process. And with Kern County stating that she would, with Santa Barbara County actually removing my child from me, and Kern County initiating the detention petition, Kern County did not have legal jurisdiction to do that. It would have been Santa Barbara's county that needed to do it. And there is no transfer documentation. There was never a transfer hearing. So all the orders that was made on my child are, my favorite word, void ab initio, which means void from the get-go. Which I had filed in California. It's a JB 180. It's a request to change the court order. And of course, the corrupt judge denied it, stating that my parental rights were terminated on February 9th of 2024, and that the appeal was dismissed on January 10th, 2024, and that the order is now final and the relief that I seek is not available. So now I'm in the process of filing the extraordinary writ in the California Supreme Court and the Appeals Court. Because I actually started going for my associate's degree as a paralegal. Because I've learned these attorneys don't do anything. They play a good game like they do.
Yeah, they violate your rights too.
Yes. And, the reason why I decided to go as a paralegal is because the paralegals are the ones who do all the footwork. Growing up, I wanted to be an attorney. But looking at the attorney's oath, I refused, because in their oath, it straight says that their first duty is to the courts and not to their clients. Getting all the court document papers from the appeal attorneys, I have over 35 pounds of paperwork just on my first 3 kids that were taken. And reading through it, there's 16 volumes. Each volume is 300 pages. Volumes 1 through 15 are when me and my husband both have a public pretender. Volume 16, I represented myself. And that was only at the last hearing, the termination hearing. So 1 court hearing. And volumes 1 through 15 are not even as thick as volume 16. Which to me shows that there was not adequate counsel.
Right.
If you can have 1 court hearing documentation thicker than over 2 years of court hearings. There's something wrong there. I actually found out reading through this court paper that my last attorney that I had fired was originally my first 3 kids that were taken, their attorney, who had asked to be relieved from the case due to a conflict of interest with the parents. But he never told me about this conflict of interest, nothing. So how the hell are you going, excuse my language, are you going to ask to be relieved from the case due to a conflict with the parents and then be assigned as the mother's counsel? So after I found this out, I did do a complaint with the ABA and sent them, the court transcripts of where he says that the conflict is with the parents when he was being relieved. When I did the Marsden motion to fire him and represent myself, he did tell the judge that he represented me, but then he made it seem like he represented my kids. And because he's like, oh, well, there should be another kid on there. I accidentally left him off. And I'm also trying to do a reverse Marsden motion. And the judge looked at him and told him, you can't do that. But, they're all members of the same club, the bar. And so all they're going to do is give him a warning.
Right.
But at least he knows I know, they know I know. And so, I found out about the 8-day gap thanks to the delivery service logs that I'm not supposed to have, but I know God made it possible for me to have these, because,
it's good. It sounds like you
they're
have a
all
good
part of the same club. And so this counsel that sent this to us obviously seen what was going on, but he can't go against his team, not out in public anyways, and so I thank him for sending that to us. I know what to do with it, thankfully.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a good case, especially a lawsuit. What does justice look like for you and your family, Samantha?
Yeah. Yes. And, I'm so thankful that, I know I'm blessed to have the case that I do, because I know most parents don't have all this evidence, even though it is happening in their cases. And I'm also with filing my wit, I honestly say anybody that's trying to fight their case, use Chat GPT, use Copilot, tell AI that, I want you to be a specialist in dependency law in this state, upload your court documents to it and tell it to analyze it, look for any violations, look for anything, and it will. And then tell it to outline you a petition, and it will.
What does justice look like for you and your family?
Justice looks, the time that they've taken, the trauma that they've caused my children, yes, they've caused me and my husband trauma too, but that doesn't matter. The trauma that they've caused my children, honestly, there will never be any justice for that, because these are innocent, not even my children, all of these children, they're innocent children, and the only justice that's going to be is when the man upstairs has his judgment day.
Right.
You know, yes. So that mark is, so that incident report was supposedly my son tripped over his boot while chasing a duck. That was my son. He, at the time, he's 3 years old, broken arm, from supposedly slipping while getting out of the shower. He's 3 years old. Why was he left alone? And my kids love the water. My kids don't ever climb out of the water voluntarily. Ever. I call them my water babies. That was the mark. That was just, I don't know what those marks were from, but they're red, you know. I have multiple pictures, even more than what I sent you of bruises to my children.
Yeah, you can send me more. I'll post them in the comments of this video and stuff.
There's also, you know, I sent it to you too, but the bruise on his forehead and a slight black eye from him supposedly running into his bedpost. What taller bed do you know that has a bedpost? I don't know any.
This one?
You know, no, that's my other son. He has the one I'm talking about. He has the dirty face because he was eating.
Oh yeah.
At the visit. Yes. So as you see right there, it's a slight bruise and slight black eye. And you know, my baby right there. He's 3 years old. Like, how can any, you know, and the injuries that he's getting in this home is the same home that my 7-year-old informed me that she was touched inappropriately at. That home is also the same home that has adopted my youngest daughter, and they are in the process of trying to adopt my son. Because, you know, even though I have all this, there's even more. You know, the way Kern County did my youngest daughter's petition is they kept her on her own case. They didn't add her on the case with her siblings. That way they were able to bypass certain protections that we should have got. That way they didn't have to show the bonding between the siblings. But because they did that, thankfully, I'm able to include all 5 of my kids in one petition instead of having to do independent petitions, which it's going to be easy to get my newborn back with everything I have. With my older ones, it would have been a lot harder. I mean, yes, I do have evidence on them, but nothing like my newborn.
Yeah.
But since they wanted to keep her off the case so they could quickly adopt her out, they actually removed my oldest daughter off the case with her siblings and put her on the case with the baby. So they actually adopted my oldest and my youngest out first. Their adoptions are already final, and they're in the process of adopting my 3 that they took first. But because of the evil that they did, you know, it's going to be easy to get all of my children home. Awesome. I know it's all within God's timing.
Yeah.
And then everything does work out in his time. And I've noticed that because, you know, as I'm sitting here working on the WIT, because it is a lot of work. It is a lot of hard work. It does get confusing, you know, for somebody that doesn't know where to go to get case law, you know, somebody that don't know what, you know, how to find the court procedures or, you know, anything like that. Like I said, I started going for my associates as a paralegal just so I could fight for my children. And, you know, now I'm at the point where I'm writing the WIT, I'm getting the case law, and the semester I'm in family law.
Right.
And so, you know, God's timing is just perfect because he's the one who worked that timing out where I'm doing family law when I need it the most. You know, when I can go ask my professor, certain questions that I can't find the answer to, and eventually, once they terminated our services and they couldn't drug test us anymore, then it wasn't a substance abuse issue anymore. It became we weren't consistent with our visitation, which is what they used to terminate.
Yeah, they just put that on paper and makes it look better.
Yeah. Which I've had Microsoft Copilot, analyze my documents that, where they constantly say that we're consistent with our visitation, and, me and my husband, we've always lived about 2 hours away from Kern County since the beginning of the case. First, we moved to San Bernardino for his job, and then we moved out here to San Luis County to help his grandma and his mom, which I'm now working IHSS for his mom. So either way is about 2 hours away from Kern County. So we would travel 2 hours every week to go see our kids. And, we were court ordered 2 visits a week for 2 hours a day. But we requested, since we had to travel and finances and everything, if we could have our visits combined into one day for 4 hours. Well, they agreed to it, but what they did with that is they never put that in the report. So even though we were doing both days in one day, they were marking it as if we were missing every second day, which would make it show that we were inconsistent. Me and my husband were actually in a head-on car collision trying to get to our visit. Yeah, I sent you that picture too. Yeah. Needless to say, we didn't make that visit, but we're alive. We're here. We were both airlifted to the hospital.
I mean, I think you have a pretty valid excuse why you missed the visit. So
yeah, that's my husband's side of the vehicle. The other picture is my side of the vehicle. Yeah, just talking about that day. So we were both airlifted to the hospital. Between us, we've had 6 surgeries. My husband's left side is pretty much all metal. He took most of the impact, as you can see, to try to keep me as safe as he could. So my injuries weren't as severe. It broke my left knee where, your long bone connects to your kneecap. I have plates and screws there, and then it broke both bones in my wrist. So I have plates and screws on both sides of my wrist on the left side. But, nobody died. The other driver just got a couple scrapes and bruises. And, like I said, once again, it was all God. That road that we're on, there's 54 miles of no reception. No cell phone service, no radio reception, nothing. After the accident, growing up, my parents always told me, if you ever get in a car accident, you automatically call us. And so without even realizing it, I followed the phone cord to my phone and called my mom on Facebook Messenger and somehow got through to her, having no reception. And all I could tell her is, Mom, I need you to call Marisol, which was the worker at the time, and tell her that we're not going to make it to our visit. Me and David were just in a bad car accident. I need you to call David's mom, and I need you to find a way to the hospital. I guess she tried to call back, and it went through, and all she could hear is the helicopters in the background. The first person that stopped was a nurse. The second person that came up was a doctor. Right as the fire truck pulled up, they pulled up, opened their door, and our engine caught fire. And, I know all of that was God. We shouldn't have made it out of that car accident alive. And so I know God's going to bring my babies home. He didn't bring me through that for me not to have my babies.
Right. What do you have to say to other mothers and even fathers that are going through this that don't have maybe a strong case like you, or that doesn't have the ability to use or sue people?
Yeah, my mom said, when she was on her way to the hospital, she said she drove by with our van up on the tow truck, and she said, all I could think is they're going to be dead before I get there. She thought that for the next 45 minutes to an hour while she drove to the hospital is they're going to be dead before I get there. My husband was in and out of consciousness. I remained conscious the whole time, and thankfully with my medical training, I knew when he came back to just to have him relax, that way he didn't injure himself more. But, we were both in wheelchair for about 6 months. I got out of the hospital, on Monday, and I had a visit on Thursday, and of course, I was at that visit without being cleared by my doctor. My husband had to stay in the hospital longer, and then he had to go to a rehabilitation facility. And, because as I said, he was a lot worse than I was. He pretty much had to learn to rewalk and everything. If we weren't consistent with our visits, we wouldn't have been in a hurry to get to our visit. We wouldn't have been in that car accident. My mom came to visit with me to help with my kids because, like I said, I was in a cast, staples, both sides. Let's see. I got my knee, both sides, so I couldn't, I have little kids. They like to run out of the room, so my mom did go to my visits to help me, but they tried, even me being there in a wheelchair, they tried to spin that around on me, that I couldn't take care of my kids because I was in a wheelchair.
Wow.
I was there before I was cleared by my doctor to be there. Like they will use anything they can against you, even when you're doing as much as you can, and even being in the wheelchair, I played with my kids, and, my boys would push me in the wheelchair, vroom, 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 you know what I mean? Like, it's crazy, and, they denied our bonding studies because we weren't consistent with our visitation, saying that there's no bond, which I sent you the video, and that video breaks my heart. You can tell with my daughter that there's a bond there. That's my same daughter that asked me, what, do you not love us? And it's hard,
You want me to play it?
No! Okay, Daddy, try to put her shoes on. Daddy, put her shoes on. I know. But she has a grip around you guys. Your mama, okay? Mommy and Daddy will see you next week, okay? I know you don't want us to go, okay? I know. But look, Naya. No! I won't, Naya. No!
So what's going on in that video? Can you hear me? Oh.
Sorry.
It's all right. I understand.
How can you sit there and say that there's no bond between this child and her parents? I don't understand it. How can you say that the best interest for her is to never see her parents again, when you can clearly tell there's a bond there? You know, I was in CPS as a child. You know, even being away from your parents, all you think about is your parents. And this system, it's all about the money. All about the money. They don't care what's best for these kids. If they did, they wouldn't remove these kids for some of the things they do. Don't get me wrong. Yes, some kids are probably better off in CPS custody, but majority of these kids are not. You know, growing up, I used to think that, you know, the parents that didn't reunify with their kids were pieces of crap that, you know, if they couldn't do what they needed to do for their kids, then they didn't deserve their kids. You know, because the perception I had, just like many, many people do, is that they're there to protect the kids, do what's best for the kids. But actually dealing with this corrupt system of actors, I've learned that the perception that they put out is not the reality of it.
Yeah, it's all ran by pedophiles and just people that
not the reality of it.
Yeah, they're trafficking souls, you know. So Samantha, to the families that are struggling, that are in a dark place, that don't have the knowledge that you might have, or you know, they just don't have any hope. What do you say to those families?
Never give up hope. Never stop fighting for your kids. We are our children's voices. You know, nobody's going to fight for your child like you're going to fight for your child. Nobody's going to love your child like you love your child. You know, and I know it takes a toll on you physically, emotionally, mentally. You know, just always know that there's a light at the end. Keep your faith. You know, God will guide you through this if you ask him for help. You know, before I wasn't really big on, yes, I went to church, but I didn't really believe that God was there to help us. But you know, moving to the Central Coast with my husband, his grandma and grandpa were pastors, you know, and just, you know, learning more and seeing the wonders that he's done, you know. Without him, I wouldn't be here today, as you've seen with the pictures. You know, a month before that accident, I almost died from a miscarriage and hemorrhaging out, where they had to do an emergency D&C and give me 2 liters of blood. Where I was telling my husband, tell my kids, mommy loves them and will watch over them, because I didn't think I was going to make it. You know, he might not, well, he won't do it right then and there. Everything's within his timing. And, you know, any parents that are needing help with research or anything, no, I'm not a lawyer. No, I cannot give legal advice. But if you have a question, ask me. I will help you try to find the answer. And anything that I do say isn't legal advice. It's what I would do if I was in your shoes as a parent. You know, I'm starting my own podcast, calling Unprotected, the truth behind CPS, you know, because there, you know, where I'm going to, you know, include people's rights, you know, help try to, you know, not teach, because that's UPL, but, you know, give them the knowledge that I'm learning, you know, get these stories out there because we all have to stand together.
Yeah.
It's going to take all of us. It's going to take God. It's going to take a lot because these people are evil. They're demonic. They're just, there's honestly not a word for them in my vocabulary.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a dark force. It really is. Samantha, I really appreciate you for coming on the show, telling your truth, and I'm gonna cut this video up and I'm gonna put it out. I still got other I got like 3 videos I still gotta work on right now.
Yeah.
I've been pretty busy, but like I said, I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you bringing up God too, and putting God into it, because I think that's important, because God is everything, right? Jesus is everything, and He's the only person that can help us through these dark times, you know. And
does make you question your faith, your beliefs. You know, it makes you question
it's like Job.
everything. It is, you
It's like the
know.
book of Job, you know.
But you gotta have that faith of a mustard seed to keep pushing through. And you know,
That's
as
it.
the Bible says, it takes a faith of a mustard seed to move a mountain.
That's
You
right.
know, no weapons formed against us shall prosper. You know, we have to have our sword. We have to have our full body of armor. You know,
That's right.
like I said before, I wouldn't really talk spiritual, but you know, with everything that he's done for me, for my husband, you know, my husband could be gone. You know, I could have not gotten all of this evidence, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. You know, I've had within these past 3 years, I've had a lot of loss. You know, like I said, I lost my daddy. I lost a cousin, an aunt. I lost my biological father, my husband's grandpa. You know, it's been, I've lost a lot, but I'm thankful and I'm grateful that I'm still here, and I know I'm here for a reason. Even I know, even if I don't get my kids back, which I honestly don't think that's the case with everything I have, I know God put me through this for a reason.
Right.
There can't be a testimony without a test.
Mm.
You know, everything happens for a reason. And parents, remember, God's not going to put more on your plate than what you can handle.
Facts.
You know, I've been reading a lot of, you know, all these moms committing suicide because of CPS taking their kids. You know,
That's what Satan wants.
exactly, you know. So moms especially, you're not alone. If you feel that you're alone, reach out to me. I'm sure reach out to Dylan. You know, you have a support network. We are here for you. Mothers taking your lives are not the case. You know, those kids are going to be 18 one day. And a lot of foster kids that I've talked to, that I've listened to their stories, they go and they look for their parents when they turn 18. So even if you don't get them back for, you know, 16, 17 years, you have that day to look forward to where they come looking for you. So do what you have to do for you. Do what you need to do to better yourself. That way, when your kid comes looking for you, you can be there the way that they need you to be there. That's what I would say to them, you know. And
thank you, Samantha. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you too, Dylan. And you know, I appreciate you for putting these stories out there because there's so many of them. So it's not just a one state thing. It's every country. It's not just the United States. It's every country. You know,
There's trafficking going on and everything. I just talked to a lady that her granddaughter was they took her to the doctor and she was anally and vaginally abused and all types of stuff. So I got to put that story out there soon too. That concludes this episode. If y'all like this content, just hit that follow button so y'all can stay updated with more content that's to come. God bless.